I'm Sim. I'm your host this morning. I believe we have folks from Asia. I know an earlier start is always challenging, so thank you very much for joining us. For our webinar today, we have two very special individuals. We have Head Silverfort CEO and Abbas, who is Microsoft Chief Cybersecurity Advisor for APAC. Both individuals, I assure you, are very passionate about this topic and deeply knowledgeable. Now, we've been, for 2 years, we've been sitting around Zoom. So today, we're not going to make you sit through an hour or 50 minutes of slides. We're going to spice things up a little bit today. So the format today is going to be more conversational. Now, I won't do enough justice to introduce both individuals myself. So I'll start off by getting both these very special individuals to introduce themselves. Abbas, why don't you start first?
Thank you, Sim. Good morning, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Abbas Kudrati. I am Microsoft Asia's Chief Cybersecurity Advisor based here in Melbourne, Australia. And apart from being a cybersecurity advisor, I'm also a part-time professor with La Trobe University. And I'm also a part-time author, written one book last year and recently finished writing a book on a zero trust, which will be released in next few weeks, few months, I believe. So looking forward to having a conversation. Over to you, Head.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Great to meet you. My name is Head Kovetz. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Silverfort. Before that, I did projects for governments, designing national security solutions for a few countries. And before that, I was a group leader at the Israeli 8200 cyber unit, managing several teams there. Great to have this opportunity to talk with you, Abbas, and with everyone.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, Head. All right, we'll start off. So, look, I think all of us, pretty much have heard of zero trust, maybe if not every day, once a week or twice a week. So we've heard a lot about it and how important it is to prevent attacks. So I think let's just start from getting the experts to give their, what their view on zero trust and what they think about it. So Abbas, do you want to maybe shed some light into this?
Yeah. See, zero trust has been a talk of the town for last, especially in last couple of years, right? Since the time we went into lockdown in early 2020, everyone started talking about zero trust. Every vendor you pick up, they all have a story about zero trust. But zero trust has been around for a while. We used to call it different naming, right? If you recall the on-prem environment, we used to have our network segmentation, our VLAN, having compartmentalizations, having a defense in depth approach. These all we have been practicing as a concept of zero trust, but we never call it a zero trust. And if you recall zero trust in past, or to give you a better understanding, the way we used to trust our employee and our asset was much different. If you recall in the network-centric environment or in on-prem environment, we used to allow our employee to come to our network or get into the network. So first you let them connect their device and then ask for the authentication and authorization. But now because of pandemic and the whole world is changed, people are asked to work from home using remote location, VPN, any device, anytime, any location. So we have to flip that mindset rather than allowing them to connect first and then authenticate, authorize. We are now forcing them to first authenticate, authorize, and then get connected, which is nothing but always verify. So explicitly, verification is required. You will not implicitly trust any of your employee as a person, as an identity, as a device. So trust no one, verify everyone, or explicit verification is the number one principle we have to adapt. To talk about two more principles to finish my definition of zero trust. So 3 principles. First, always verify. Second principle we have to adapt, which we used to do in our on-prem environment, which is called assume breach. Now, assume breach is a new word, but if you look at it, it's nothing but a defense in depth approach. You have to have a layered defensive approach in your environment so that if first control fail, you have a second control or in mechanism to protect against that. And always have a mindset that my network is always under attack. And that's why it's called assume breach mindset. And the third principle we have to follow as a part of our zero trust architecture when we are building up is having a least privilege model. Why least privilege? Because that's a core focus of today's discussion is identity, right? Identity attacks are increased, and that's why we have to focus on every employee or in the organization, you should adopt a least privilege model, give access based on need to know and need to do basis. So when you follow this three principle and create that kind of a model, we will be able to start our journey on a zero trust approach, and we'll discuss more as we move forward today.
Thank you, Abbas. That's really interesting. I like the last principle, the bit that you talk about identity. I've heard that that zero trust is about identity, and Head, you started a company pretty much based on that. So do you have anything to add? Perhaps give us your perspective. I'm sure you have a lot to say.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree a lot with what Abbas said, and I think identity is a very important piece here. Of course, it's not the only one. I think, as much as many vendors would like to say that zero trust is a specific solution, it's more of a general approach that all the different solutions need to align for. And there are different aspects of zero trust, from the network, from the endpoint, and from the identity. But I think identity is very important and is sometimes being neglected here, because when we talk about always verify, that's all about identity, right? When we talk about least privileges, one of the best way to achieve that is with identity. So when you look at zero trust implementation and you only focus on, let's say, the network segmentation, okay, that means that device A might not be able to connect to application B, but or maybe it will, but that doesn't mean that the user that is trying to connect is who they say they are. And that's a very important piece, right? Especially if we are talking about assumed breach. We're going to, we need to be aware that one of the endpoints will get breached. And then when they will try to move laterally throughout the network, we need to make sure that we understand if it's really the user or not, even if he's accessing things that maybe they're allowed to. Maybe it's an admin that is allowed to connect to all the other devices, but we need to make sure it's actually them. And I think maybe the best way to explain that is through an example of an attack. So I actually thought about sharing something real quick, and this is an example from a ransomware attack that we just researched in one of our customers' environments. Actually, a customer that we were kind of called in to help with this. And it's a ransomware attack, which I think is a top concern for anyone these days. And I think this ransomware attack is a great example of the principles of how these attacks usually work and where zero trust is crucial. So in this case, an attacker was able to breach through the Exchange server using the Log4Shell vulnerability. And it might be Log4Shell today, it might be something else tomorrow. There's always a way to get into one of the endpoints or one of the resources. And that's not such a disaster if it stops there, but the problem is it always continues to move laterally throughout the network. So in this case, they were able to compromise service accounts, non-human identities, and attackers love those because they usually have a lot of permissions, and the passwords might be hard-coded or cached, and usually it's a great account to leverage in order to move laterally. From that point, they were moving to multiple other endpoints, found admin credentials, of course, and then using those admin credentials, moved to even more resources, endpoints and servers, and then executed the ransomware. So if you look at this, and this is the most common scenario, right? The way they breach might be different, the way they move laterally might be different, but the principle is the same. Now, if you look at this, the perimeter, it's something that people have been trying to protect for a long time, but just like Abbas said, we have to assume breach now. People are working from home, but they might bring their laptops into the office the day after. At some point, it doesn't even matter anymore if it's inside the network or outside of the network. There's no such thing anymore. And that's why we say identity is the new perimeter, right? So in order to stop this lateral movement, you can try to segment the network, but one additional, in my opinion, very effective approach is to achieve zero trust from the identity layer. Of course, all these pieces need to work together, but the identity layer makes sure that you can actually prevent an attacker from authenticating between the devices and effectively from moving anywhere, not because you necessarily have segmentations between every device and every other device, but because you control the identity, the authentication, and you prevent it from becoming such an effective way of taking over the entire network as it is today. So this is just a little bit on what it is. And I'll just say that there are a few principles in my opinion, to identity zero trust that you need to consider when you implement it or you try to achieve it. So one is unification. You need to make sure that when you talk about identity zero trust, you look at all the identities. Your on-prem Active Directory. So you were saying something?
No, I'm saying, yeah, human, non-human, both. Yeah, as you said, all kind of identities.
Yes, human and non-human is another very important piece, right? Privileged and non-privileged, on-prem and cloud, inside the network and outside of the network, if these terms even mean anything anymore. Yeah. And that's one very important piece, to look at everything. The second is context. You want to analyze the risk, understand what the users are doing all the time, look at all the possible details, not only from the identity. This is where all the other pieces connect as well. Connect all the other pieces from endpoint, from network, from cloud, just to understand the full picture. Enforcement is then very important. You don't want to just detect. You want to be able to block access or trigger MFA or do something about it when there's a reason. And the last is granularity. You don't want to only protect the initial access, but then allow people to connect to many other resources and have no control. You want to really look at every access and make sure it's still that person and it's still something that they need to do. So these are some principles of identity zero trust that I think are very important to consider.
Yeah. I since you're saying about the access control, I really like this particular slide, which talks about how you can configure your adaptive access policy, based on some of the principles you talk about, right? Signing risk. It could be the risk, maybe the location where the employee is trying to access is not an approved location, right? You always want your employee to work because they are in Australia, for example, but all of a sudden they start to connect from India or Singapore. That means there could be a malicious user, So sign-in risk could be one of that based on location. Another area of sign-in risk could be the password could have been compromised, and they're using a compromised password,
Yeah.
Or the device state also is really important, as you said, right? If the device has a malware, you don't want them to get connected. If it is a ransomware, you don't want it to get connected. That is where your adaptive policy engine comes into play. Just to addition to what you said, I thought I'll share that opinion on that here.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is why I love our partnership with Microsoft, because Microsoft sees all these different angles, right? And helps us, when we focus on the identity, to get the context from all the other pieces, from the device, from the network, from the cloud, from all the other things that makes the full picture.
I have to say, I definitely love the partnership of Microsoft and Silverfort, but watching both of you sort of bouncing off each other, it's great. At this point, I'd like to remind you, I just want to say to the audience that, look, this is an interactive webinar. We're trying to be more conversational. If at any point there's any elements, aspects of zero trust that interest you and you've got questions, please ask us. We'll try to weave it into our conversation and get them answered as soon as we can. Please ask questions, and we'll be able to share this experience together as we progress through the webinar. I like the.
I think there's a question for Abbas.
Yeah, so I'll let me answer that because it goes together with our flow. So thank you, Abdullah, for asking. So is adaptive access different than conditional access? Well, adaptive access is an approach. Conditional access is a conditional access engine. In case of a Microsoft, we're talking about. We have an Azure AD. Now let me highlight this. This will help you much better understand that. And yeah, feel free to please ask questions. So we would love to make it more interactive. So conditional access is nothing based on the condition which you define in your policy engine. So NIST has an approach talking about policy engine as a central plane. Open Group has an approach of having a policy engine as a central plane. Forrester, if you took it as take their standard for zero trust, they also talk about policy engine as a central plane. And in case of Microsoft, that policy engine is nothing but our Azure AD conditional access, where we provide you with the pre-built policies in there, and you can fine tune based on the certain condition. It could be the device risk, identity risk, physical risk, or the type of authentication you want to approach that, right? And those conditions, you fine tune it into a conditional access engine, and based on the threat which we get into our environment, including the what Head was showing in his slide, based on the policy which you have fine tuned according to your company, those conditions are then risk score has been given, and based on the risk score, the policy engine or a conditional access engine makes a decision whether you want to allow them to access your public resource, cloud application, or on-premise resource, or you want to block them. You want to increase the assurance, could be multi-factor authentication, or you want to force them to change the password because the user is using a compromised password, or you want to block the legacy authentication. All those things, you can take a decision in the conditional access engine. Yeah, I think we got a question for you, Head.
Yeah, so I see a question about a roadmap to passwordless sign-in. So maybe I'll say something general about Silverfort, and that will help you understand where we fit in. So Silverfort is a product that does detection and protection for identity, right? And the way we do it is we connect to all the different identity stores, and we are able to enforce protection on top of them. Now, in order to actually leverage security controls or user experience features like MFA, passwordless login, conditional access, things like that, we are actually able to extend your existing products. So for example, the Microsoft passwordless sign-in or the Microsoft MFA, as well as others, we're able to extend them everywhere, even to systems that don't support them today. And I'll talk a little bit about it later on. That means our strategy is very aligned with our partners like Microsoft, so that we can extend their features, passwordless, MFA, and so on, SSO, everywhere, even to places where it wasn't possible before.
Yep, absolutely. We can take one more question and then move on. Yeah, question about biometric.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Is there a roadmap for using biometric? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are already. So our product works with any kind of multi-factor authentication or any kind of authentication factors. So we work with biometric. We work with FIDO tokens. We work with also OTP, mobile push, all kinds of MFA offerings, which, by the way, could be ours, but honestly, they could be what you're already using. So if your organization is already using the Azure MFA, that's the best way to go. You don't want to enroll your users on something new. What you want to do is take that MFA that they already have, or your chosen MFA, whether it's biometric or something else, and be able to apply it and enforce it in a much more adaptive way everywhere. Not only in Azure, not only on-prem, not only in the perimeter, but really everywhere on top of any system. But we are not limited to any type of authentication. We can do all of them.
Yeah, and it exists, as Ed said, if you already have an existing investment with Microsoft, you can use passwordless such as Windows Hello for your laptop, Azure MFA as a authenticator app. Additionally, you can bring YubiKey or a FIDO key, a FIDO 2.0 compliant key. Even now, Microsoft has recently acquired a company called Nuance, and very soon you will have a biometric voice-based authentication. So based on your voice, it will allow you to authenticate, because that's something our customers are asking, considering people are wearing masks and gloves, especially healthcare worker. That's something to look out. And all those integration will work with Silverfort because it is tightly integrated at an API level. So you can have a best of both worlds, I would say.
When will we be able to do it based on our thoughts, Abbas? Anytime soon?
Absolutely. Very soon. Yeah, we announced it a couple of weeks back about the Nuance integration.
Wow. Amazing, guys. It's a nice segue. All these questions are really nice segue into what I was thinking. It seems there's a lot of interest, obviously, in terms of, okay, now that we've heard what Zero Trust is, And I like the way had you explain or you join the dots between, well, why do we want zero trust, and to some of the real life attacks, ransomware being a primary example, identity-based attacks. So I'd like to now move on to what can we buy? What is Microsoft doing about zero trust? I know, Abbas, you touch on some really specific around your conditional access, but would you mind to maybe just talk a bit more about, maybe a bit broader around, well, what is Microsoft doing in terms of zero trust? Because it sounds hard. So is there something that people can buy from Microsoft?
Yeah, first of all, let me tell you my own approach of definition, right, on zero trust. So zero trust is not about technology. If you go back, actually, I have another slide. So customer usually think zero trust in multiple way. I have seen customer who said, I don't know about it and I don't care about it. You know? And I have a set of customer who says, trusting people is not an option for us. We want to trust our people. And they don't like the word zero trust in that, because zero trust is a negative word in many cultures and many countries. You can call it a dynamic trust model, right? Change the word, doesn't matter, but it's the same thing. And then we have seen people or customers talking about, oh, I can buy a product or a shiny box from the market and I can have a zero trust. But actually, there are two main approach to zero trust. And which one is better? I will leave it to you as an audience to decide. But I'm a strong believer of zero trust should be an identity-centric approach. And here is the reason why. So two set of approaches or view of a zero trust. First view, we call it an identity-centric view, and which has been endorsed by organizations such as Forrester ZTX model. Again, very identity and a policy engine, which I mentioned about. If you look at NIST standard, if you look at CISA model, and if you look at Microsoft, we all strongly believe identity-centric approach is a way to go. And as Head was explaining, identity could be of device, could be of your machine, could be of a human, could be location identity, could be application identity. It covers all kind of identity, right? Then there is a separate set of approach. We call it network-centric approach. Now, these are the organizations who are heavily invested in a network-based or perimeter-based organization. Could be OT environment, SCADA environment, and they want to have a network base because identity is of course there, because identity will connect to the network, but their focus is on network side. Organizations such as Google approach, their Beyond Cope was very network centric approach. Now their approach is changing, of course. If you look at the Netflix LISA model, location independent security assessment, again, very network centric approach, right? And then there are a SASE provider, secure access service edge kind of a company provider, such as Zscaler. They have both view. Then there could be Palo Alto, Cisco's. They are very from network organization point of view. So there are two set of organization, as I say, identity based and network based. You can use a combination of both. And if you're going back to the correcting the story, how Microsoft thinks about it, we talk about identity and endpoint as the two of the main two pillars. Using the conditional access engine in the central plane or having a policy engine with Azure AD conditions, combined with our threat intelligence, because that is what you're going to get in terms of whether those signals are risky or not. And then you can have access or protect your data, protect your application, protect your infrastructure, protect your network. There are a number of solutions you can overlay. But before thinking about the solutions and technology, think about the model, think about the architecture, think about the risk, and think about, is zero trust right for you? And then you start thinking about technology at the last stage after those things are being decided.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, Abbas. Head, I'd like to touch on the, what about the, most organizations are hybrid. There's always the on-prem world that we love for so long and love to get rid of, but not quite possible yet. Do you have, can you shed some light on that? And perhaps it's...
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So, when we look at trying to implement zero trust, especially from the identity perspective, one of the challenges is that networks are indeed hybrid, and you have different identity platforms as well. So you might have Active Directory on-prem and Azure AD in the cloud, and maybe a privilege access management solution, or maybe another type of identity provider, whether it's a legacy one or a modern one. And sometimes each of them is a little bit siloed in terms of the visibility and the enforcement. So what we're trying to do is to connect them all together, kind of have a unified layer of zero trust policy enforcement on top of all the IAM platforms. And basically help customers extend the capabilities they already have with Azure AD, conditional access, and extend them to all these other places where it might not be available, like legacy environments, Active Directory, even air-gapped environments, anywhere. So I'll explain a little bit about what we do. I also see there's a question in the chat about non-human identities, about service accounts. So I'll definitely touch on that as well. And maybe I'll actually show you just a little bit of what the product itself looks like, because I think it really helps understanding this. So this is just the Silverfort Dashboard. There are many other reports here, but this is one view that I think really helps understand the concept.
I love this view.
One side. What? Sorry, Abbas?
I love this view, yeah.
It looks like it belongs in your background photo.
Yes, it matches with my background. I should change it.
You can add it for next time. So on one side, we see all the identities, right? We see privileged users, we see regular users, we see service accounts, going back to that question. And then we see the different identity providers, right? Starting from Azure AD, but also, the on-prem ones, maybe others, Okta, Ping. You got also Radius, which is not exactly an IDP, but it also authenticates certain devices. And on the other side, you have all the resources. Now, what we're doing, and this is exactly aligned with the zero trust principles, we are looking at all these authentications and we are deciding whether they are trusted or whether they need to be verified with maybe a second step of authentication, or maybe they need to be blocked because this is not something this user should be accessing. And all of this is being done using our risk engines, whether it's machine learning or all kind of known threats or external risk indicators. So we can take the risk, for example, from Microsoft Defender, and we can apply it here. So maybe Microsoft Defender detected a threat in the network. It can tell Silverfort, and Silverfort can immediately change the policy, maybe trigger MFA with, with the Azure MFA or any MFA you're using, maybe block access, dynamically change it. But the big advantage here is the fact that this is now possible on top of any resource. We can do this on top of legacy applications, command line interfaces that ransomware is using a lot. File shares, databases, industrial systems, medical systems, all kinds of things that are not your standard web application that could be protected before. So think about all the capabilities that you currently have for your modern web applications with Azure AD, extending those security controls, those capabilities, this visibility and enforcement everywhere, even to places where it wasn't possible. Now, maybe just a specific a minute on service accounts to answer that question. So here, for example, I think I need to reshare my screen.
Is it just me, or there was some disturbance?
I think there's some. I think there's some technical issue at the head side. We'll wait. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
we can.
Yeah. Your video is frozen, looks like.
Yep. Video is back. I can see your screen.
Screen is frozen as well.
Yeah.
The dots are not moving. But yeah, let me answer. Let me answer the question from Abdullah while Head is coming back. So thanks for another question. Are the two approaches mutually exclusive? Can they combine to get the best of both the world, or what the version situation? Yes, definitely. We have seen customers leveraging both approach combined, because even for having a SASE approach or a network-centric approach, you will need identity on your side, right? If you haven't fixed the identity part, you won't be able to provide access to the network environment as such. So it can be combined together and to achieve the best results. Unless you don't have a need of going to the network side, then there are customers who are not heavily invested in network, and they allow your employee to work completely 100% access everything in their company through cloud, or if there are any applications on premises which are required, then they take a second approach in terms of either through VPN or through app proxy, or if it is a legacy application or legacy authentication, that's where our partnership comes in with Silverfort, which I'm sure Head is going to cover in the future discussion.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can do.
Okay, so that was my internet connection. So I'll quickly go back to what I stopped doing, but just say a few words on non-human identities, because I think these are very often overlooked. And I think they're very important. So what Silverfort is doing for service accounts is, first of all, discovering all of them, which is already a lot of value for many companies. Just showing you all the accounts that are non-human. We do this not only because of how they look like, their names, their attributes, their group memberships, but we also do it based on the actual behavior. So we can pick up on non-human behavior when it comes to identity, which is a unique capability to us. We can actually pick up on an account that is acting in a way that seems very machine-like. Okay, and we can say this doesn't look like a human. I mean, this one is easy because it's called SVC DR backup. But even if it was called Abbas, right? Maybe Abbas is using his personal credentials to run some scheduled task. That's not a great idea sometimes, and we'll pick up on that. And we'll be able to say, for this account, for example, we're seeing it always coming from these 6 sources to these 7 destinations. This is exactly the least privilege principle that Abbas was talking about. So we're seeing that it's only doing this, and it's only, it's very predictable. So we see that, as you just saw in the graph, we see that we kind of know what it's going to do. If there's any anomaly, we at least suspect that it's not something that needs to happen. So we will automatically recommend the policy. And we will say, we suggest that this account only log in from these sources to these destinations, maybe even with a certain pattern. And if not, let's alert to the SIM, or let's even block access. So this is where we can really achieve zero trust, not only for humans, but also for service accounts. The great thing about this is this doesn't require you to rotate passwords on these accounts. You don't need to change them at all. So this is really the first solution that can discover these accounts, show you what they're doing, and enforce a policy on them with a zero trust approach without you having to modify them at all or risk breaking them, because that's usually the problem. I mean, first of all, you don't maybe know where they are and what are the dependencies, but also because of all these dependencies, it's very risky to change them or rotate their passwords, and we can protect them with a zero trust approach without it. So that's a little bit on service account.
I want to highlight one of my personal experience since you touched upon the service account, right? I used to be a CISO before joining Microsoft, and all of a sudden, globally, we decided to change our policy that all our service account password has to be changed from 8 character to 15 character. Now, first of all, I have to go and look for all the service account, which took me few weeks to check how many service accounts are there. And on top of it, I have no idea whether those service accounts are active or not. And those password has not been changed for last 8 years. So imagine if I change a password and something breaks, it will be a disaster situation in my environment because I have no visibility whether they are active or not. It took me almost 8 months to check one password at a time, change it, and wait, is somebody screaming or not? Exactly. And it happened. I was in Melbourne. We changed one of the password, and one of the UPS in Sydney went down. So imagine where those service accounts have been created by who, how many years back.
It's so much easier to reuse the same accounts by another application instead of creating a new one, right?
Yeah. So it was a nightmare, and I wish I had something like this 5 years back in my role. With a click of a button, I know what's happening and where I need to change those things. And I think one of the users is concurring with me. Dan, you're on the same boat. Exactly.
Yeah. It's every company we talk to has this problem. I mean, I think zero trust, the best thing is to achieve it on a broader level, really, for everyone. But I think that in many cases the service accounts are kind of being forgotten about, or maybe people assume that they're just too hard to deal with because of so many dependencies and so on. So this is why I think really an end-to-end solution that automates some of these processes is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yep. Must be where your gray. Sorry, I shouldn't say gray hair. Sorry. Let's move on. Look, while we're on that, I think the real life story is really going to be very helpful, and it's going to resonate with everyone. So, perhaps back to you again, or Abbas yourself after this. Is there something you can share with us? Some real life story, customer success story, or something like that? Yeah.
I can actually share one.
Let me start, then you can pitch in for me, because that's a very use case you can help our customers to understand. I'll tell you, most recently I've been involved with 2 or 3 organizations in the region who are embarking their journey on a zero trust. And I'll tell you what challenges they are facing, and all of them have a different kind of challenge, which is where I want to highlight and inform our users today. So one of the company, they took a very identity-centric approach, a large telecom company in Asia. And they wanted to fix, very first thing is identity, go passwordless. But after almost 1 year on the project, fixing all the identity, they hit a brick wall, saying that Abbas, I cannot move forward because I have identities which are using the legacy authentication method. And I have a challenge on securing them into our moving into our zero trust concept, because in Azure Conditional Access, I have a policy saying that I will not allow them to connect my application remotely, because as you know, legacy authentication methods are very vulnerable. Could be POP3, SMTP, and all those things where you cannot secure them, and that too, especially with 2MFA. So that was one challenge, and I want Head to help me answer how our users can take advantage. Second challenge, and before I pass it on to Head, is on the on-premises application. This was another customer on the critical infrastructure side. They had lots of application which they wanted to migrate, almost 1,500 application. They were able to successfully 50-60% of the application they re-architected and move it, but there are some applications that say I cannot touch it, I cannot change it, I cannot move it, because of the sheer problem that they are still active, but they are using very old legacy method. And if I have to change that, imagine this application was created back, 20 years back. They have to first upgrade it to a COBOL, because it was using a machine model or what, I don't know what, before my age. At first they have to upgrade to COBOL. And after upgrading to COBOL, that's another challenge, to find a COBOL programmer. After upgrading to COBOL, then only they can re-architect into a modern technology called .NET or Java or whatever, and then move to the cloud. And the whole project is required $25 million of investment. And but they want to secure it, They hit the brick wall. What am I going to do on that? Can you help me? So over to you, Head. What can be done in these cases?
That's a great example, and that's exactly the kind of things we see, because in many organizations, some of the most critical business applications are like that. Old, nobody wants to touch them. They're using very vulnerable protocols, but they're just there to stay. Sometimes because they're old, sometimes because they just bought them from some third party and they can't even touch them. We've seen companies, especially in manufacturing, healthcare, they buy equipment that they're not allowed to modify. So this equipment comes in and it uses a legacy protocol, but if you touch it, you lose the warranty, so you can't really change it.
Yep.
So this is what we've been helping companies with, and maybe I'll actually share an example of a case where we worked together with Microsoft on a very large customer, Fortune 100, very large organization with a few hundreds of thousands of employees. And they initially came to us because of exactly this. So they said they have 400 applications and systems that they just can't build secure authentication into. They can't modify, but they're super critical. After a month or two of conversation, they figured out it's not 400, it's 2,000. They kept finding more and more within the business of these gaps. And that's where it started. And we showed them how we can extend the Azure MFA, which they were using in the cloud, how we can extend that to those systems, even though those systems were using legacy protocols like LDAP and NTLM and Kerberos, and they couldn't, be easily moved, or some of them at all moved to the cloud, to Azure AD. And Silverfort was brought in as that bridge, kind of almost like this abstraction layer between the systems that they were trying to protect and the security controls they wanted to use, which were the Azure ones. So we worked with Microsoft to plan that, because Microsoft was trying to help them get, more and more applications to Azure AD, but it was, just like you said, sometimes not realistic. By the way, many of these systems were not even web-based, so there were things that couldn't have been moved no matter what. And then we started mapping together with Microsoft and with this large customer other things like service accounts, like command line access, which they were worried about because of ransomware, things that they weren't even thinking about because they were thinking about those applications. They couldn't even imagine that you could do the same thing for remote PowerShell sessions, or things that are considered almost unprotectable by these sort of technologies. But they are the ways attackers get in, right? They don't come to many times to the web, protocols. Many times they use these command line tools and just go to the back door of the same resource, the same server. So over the course of a few months, we helped them take all these systems and connect them or bridge them into Azure AD, with Silverfort acting as the bridge or the glue between these pieces. And then they figured, we can actually consolidate everything on Azure AD. We can take all of our legacy, Active Directory and a few other identity vendors that were in there, bridge everything with Silverfort to the Azure AD, conditional access, SSO, passwordless, and just save years of rewriting those applications and of figuring out how to protect all these kind of things that there's just no solution for. So this is a case where we worked with Microsoft very closely, and we just got a great result, I think, for the customer.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah.
Fantastic. Abbas, do you have any more you can share?
I can share some of the mistakes to avoid. Since we're talking about zero trust, I thought I'll share some of the content from my recent book, which I'm releasing on zero trust. Right? People think zero trust is very much about technology, and security or CIO and the CISO can together start this project, and they will be successful. That's the very first mistake people make it. Because when you are thinking of a zero trust architecture as a project to start the journey, it has to be our organization wide, because it's not only about the technology, and it's not only about the security, because you have to first understand what are the business objective or business benefit enterprise level I can achieve by implementing this new model. Because if the business is not buying in this new fantastic way of re-architecting your entire model, then you're not going to be successful, because there are fundamentally things you will have to change. For example, I had talked about application migration. You may think of, I want to migrate all the application, but have you even considered what the other business department have been existing plan? Maybe you need to go in a way that you both have to merge in a halfway. That okay, your applications are already in a plan of modernization. Let's start and focus those applications in a way that we can adapt this zero trust architecture model, by providing a conditional access or by securing the application without using a VPN or having an app proxy on that side, right? So, and there are policies you will change it. So those policies maybe require an endorsement from the legal team and the HR team, because all of a sudden you decide that, okay, I'm going to block all my users. Anyone who is trying to access outside Australia, I'm going to block it as a part of conditional access. What if the person goes on vacation? Will he be or she will be allowed to continue to work? So those things has to be agreed upon, aligned with the HR policy and your legal policies and all. Then you can take those decision making. So in short, it's an organization wide. You need to create a governance team, a representative from each of the area when you start that particular project, and go phase by phase. Don't take a big bang approach. I'm going to go migrate all my 1,000 applications. you have to start with a small number of application or the application which is being used by maximum number of people. And to give you an example, what Microsoft did in our own zero trust journey. So when Microsoft was thinking of 4 or 5 years back, when we took a call that, okay, we want to adopt this zero trust model, one of the first question our CISO had is, which application is being used by maximum number of people in Microsoft, and how are they using it? That's the very first question he wanted to get answer for. And to get that answer, he realized that there are lots of applications which are used by most of the employees, but he wanted to pin down on top 4 or 5 or 10 applications, right? And those applications were on premises. So, and to understand that, he took a very creative approach. He started logging all our VPN activity logs, because every time I try to access any application which is on premise, it automatically fires a VPN. So a VPN on-demand VPN, it was turned on. So when the CISO started looking in terms of which application demands on-demand VPN gets turned on, those are the applications I want to migrate first, because when you turn on the VPN, you are using the internet bandwidth, the VPN bandwidth, and a lot of other things are required to be done, right? And to avoid that kind of a cost, we identified that these are the 5 applications used by maximum number of people, and these are the 5 applications we want to move it. Either you can lift and shift, or you migrate, or you re-architect, or you shut down and create a new application. Those decisions are secondary, but this is how we identified those and took an approach of moving on that, right? So I thought these are some of the things I thought I'll share with the audience, that think of a zero trust as an enterprise-wide project, not a security or IT-based project.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
I see a couple of questions, so maybe I'll take them real quick.
Yeah, there's a question from Tim. Go for it.
So the first was about, this legacy application problem we talked about with applications running Windows 2003. And we've seen a lot of these kind of things. And just the comment was about cyber insurance, that sees this as a problem because of the unsupported OS. We actually see a lot of these cyber insurance driven projects coming to us now. Many of them in the US, in Europe. Now we're starting to see a lot in Asia as well. The cyber insurers now require, among other things, that you add multi-factor authentication to any privileged access and any access to many types of systems. Some of them are things that are, seem impossible to protect with MFA. Network equipment and all kind of admin interfaces that don't really support that. So we're seeing a lot of companies coming to us to comply with cyber insurance and be able to renew it and get coverage. Even if you have these kind of very old OSs, we are actually able to add protection. So you might not be able to deploy even endpoint protection on these, but we are able to protect them through the authentication. We're able to make sure nobody can compromise them, nobody can move laterally from them, so they become much less risky. But of course, like we said, identity is just one piece. And the second question was about a little bit more on how we protect against things like brute force attacks and ransomware. So I'll say that what Silverfort is basically doing, think about it as kind of the identity protection layer on top of all the IAM platforms. So things like brute force attacks, like ransomware propagation, the phase where the ransomware tries to spread, these are all things that leverage credentials. They're trying to compromise the credentials, or they're using stolen credentials to do some things, and credential-based attacks are right now the most common technique. So what Silverfort is doing is looking at all the users. Every time a user or a service account is trying to connect from anywhere to anywhere with credentials, or with a hash, right, or a ticket, whatever kind of token it is, we're able to see that, analyze that, and react in real time. And there are several solutions in the market that can do the detection part for identity threats, but identity threat protection is much more tricky, at least in some areas, because we don't want to just look at the logs retroactively and send more alerts to your SIEM and overload it even more than it's already overloaded today, as I'm sure. we want to react in real time. If we see an authentication or an access attempt that is not something that should happen, or maybe it's just high risk because of the type of resource or the context we talked about, we want to trigger MFA or block access or ask someone to approve, do something about it without overloading your SOC. And that means that if we see, for example, to answer this question, someone trying many passwords on one of the accounts, or by the way, it can also be a password spray attack when we try passwords on many accounts. Or if we're seeing lateral movement, like what ransomware is using, pass the hash, pass the ticket, techniques like that, we automatically trigger step-up authentication or block access or do something about it. And then you don't need to look at thousands of alerts in your SOC. You only need to look at the ones where the user couldn't authenticate, couldn't prove who they are. Because if they could prove who they are, we'll let them in and we'll even give you feedback saying this was a false positive. So you can actually train or almost crowdsource your alerts to Silverfort so that we can verify your employees and tell your SOC team, these are the real ones. So it's not only that we are preventing ransomware brute force, we're actually making sure your SOC team doesn't need to spend time on them unless the user couldn't verify who they are, and that's your true positive alerts. That's the one you actually want to look at. Yeah, so that's that's to answer the questions. Maybe one last thing, and just to relate to something Abbas was saying about the migration of applications, and maybe that's the last thing I want to show. Just the way Silverfort does this, the way we discover all these applications across the different identity platforms. And then allow you to take applications and, just like Abbas was saying, see who's the most active one, who's using them, prioritize them, because this journey is a long one, or it could be a long one if you don't know where to
start. Where were you 5 years back, Ed? I would have loved this 5 years back. How old is the company?
Yeah.
How old is Silverfort, by the way?
Thank you, Abbas. We were building this, we were building this for you. So
I wish we had this 5 years back, but no, this is gold. I love it.
Thank you. I am very glad that you say this. I think that we really spend so much time, and our product team spends so much time to understand for each of these problems. We talked about service accounts, we talked about identity threats, we talked about migration. For each of these problems, not only provide the technology, but provide the end-to-end journey of how you achieve it. So here, we don't only give you the technology of connecting things to Azure AD. We also give you the journey. It starts from discovery. It continues with prioritization. Which applications should you start from because it's more active or it's more risky. And then with one button, take an application that is currently on another IAM solution and seamlessly bridge it to Azure AD. And with one click, it's mapped into Azure AD, and you can now leverage all the features Abbas was talking about with conditional access. All the zero trust functionality will now be available to a legacy Windows 2003 server, right? And that's something that really simplifies the journey for zero trust, because these capabilities already exist in places like Azure AD. Yeah. What we want to do at Silverfort is just extend those things to the places where they weren't available.
I have a question for you, Ed, because I really like what I didn't know about this feature in Silverfort. If I have a CASB, which is Microsoft CASB or any other CASB, which gives me an identifies the risky application, can I combine that risky application along with your application? So in one dashboard, I know that this is the application, this is the authentication type, these are the active users, but according to the CASB, this is a risky application.
Yes, absolutely. We take into our risk scoring, let's look at, I will not spend much time here, there's a lot to say, but let's look at one of the users that is a high risk right now and look at why. And you'll see that some of these things, we talked about brute force, we talked about attacks, kernel hosting, weak protocols, but there's also API calls coming from other products. And this is where one of our best partners is really Microsoft, sending us alerts. It could be, from the CASB, it could be from Defender, it could be from many places. And we look at this and we say, okay, so Microsoft said that this is risky. So now let us do something about it over there in those, those legacy authentications. So the idea is not for Silverfort to be another silo that looks at its own risk, right? We are a small piece in the puzzle of risk and context, but it's to take the data from Microsoft, from your other vendors, take all of it from your SIEM, from your SOAR, and use it for real-time enforcement. So if all these great products are telling you that there's risk for this user or this application or this device, why have your SOC team investigate it for days and react too late? You send it via API to Silverfort immediately, and we dynamically change the authentication policy for that user. Maybe that user, before there was a risk, could just log in with the Windows passwords. But when there's a risk coming from, let's say from Defender, we'll change that. So now they need to log in with the Azure MFA. So we're dynamically changing based on the risk coming even from other products. We really don't want to be another silo. We want to be kind of the bridge or the glue between all these pieces.
Absolutely. Oh, fantastic. I think we are almost on the time.
Yeah. Yep. We're almost time, and thank you, gentlemen, both of you. We've heard a lot today. I certainly learned a lot. We heard about what Zero Trust is, what Microsoft is doing, what Silverfort's doing, how we both partners to be even greater, and most importantly, some of the real life examples and what to do and what not to do. So, thank you both for that. I'd like to, we got 2 more minutes. Is there any final remarks from either of your good selves before I?
I invite you to try this. I mean, we'd love to work, with you together with Microsoft, and we really are offering any of you the opportunity to try this for free and see for yourself what it can do for you. And have continue these conversations so that we can understand how we can help more organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And from my side, I would say, if you want to assess your environment from Zero Trust, go ahead and try our Zero Trust assessment tool, which is completely free on an online portal, and look at what are the gaps. And if you feel that identity is one of your gap and based on use case, then definitely we have partnership. Microsoft as well as Silverfort can help you achieve that objective.
Thank you, Abbas. Thank you, Head. So I want to thank all the audience as well. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for being engaging, and thank you for spending time with us. Now in Australia, it's traditional that for kids parties, you get a goodie bag. So I've got a little something. It's a slide. So for those audience who spend time with us today, we want to say thank you to you, and we really appreciate you doing this by giving you a free assessment. Damon, so you can contact myself or Damon. Damon is the director for Australia and New Zealand. My role is I'm the SE director for the APAC region. So if you're from APAC, feel free to contact me. Either one of us, it's okay. We want to, we can help you assess and see where you're at in terms of your journey or in Zero Trust. So with that, we'll say goodbye to you, and thank you very much. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Right.
And thank you, Sim and Abbas.
Yeah, same pleasure.
Thanks, Abbas.